He thought he had discarded her like yesterday's trash. Preston Calloway, a billionaire used to getting everything he wanted, sat in the city's most exclusive restaurant with his young mistress, laughing about his boring ex-wife. But the laughter died in his throat the moment the doors opened. There she was, Vivian. Not the broken woman he left, but a queen draped in diamonds. And she wasn't alone. Clinging to the arm of the one man Preston feared, she revealed a secret that would shatter his world. A baby bump that belonged to him, now protected by his greatest enemy. This is the story of a brutal betrayal and the ultimate satisfying revenge. The air inside L'Obsidienne smelled of white truffles, aged cognac, and the distinct metallic scent of old money. It was the kind of establishment where the menus didn't list prices, and the waiters moved with the silence of ghosts. For Preston Calloway, the CEO of Calloway Tech and the city's most eligible bachelor since his divorce 3 months ago, this was just a Tuesday. He swirled the amber liquid in his crystal glass, looking bored. Across from him, Lydia was talking. She was always talking. "Preston, are you even listening to me?" Lydia pouted, tapping a manicured fingernail against the rim of her champagne flute. She was 22, a model with startling blue eyes and a personality that had seemed refreshing 2 months ago, but was now starting to grate on his nerves like sandpaper. I said, "The penthouse needs to be redecorated. That drab grey colour your ex-wife chose is just so depressing. It has bad energy." Preston sighed, setting his drink down a little too hard. The sound echoed slightly in the hush of the private booth. "Do whatever you want, Lydia. Hire a designer. Just stop asking me about throw pillows while I'm trying to check the Nikkei index." Lydia recoiled slightly, her eyes narrowing. "You're in a mood. Is it because of the merger? Everyone says Calloway Tech is struggling." "Everyone knows nothing," Preston snapped, his voice cold. "The merger with Valerius Industries is a formality. Dominic Valerius is a shark, but he knows a good acquisition when he sees one. He'll sign the papers on Friday, and I'll be $1 billion richer. Then maybe I'll buy you that island you won't shut up about." Lydia squealed, her previous annoyance forgotten instantly. She reached across the table to squeeze his hand, her diamond bracelet, a gift he'd bought her while he was still married, catching the light. Preston offered a thin, practiced smile, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about Vivian. It was strange. He hadn't loved Vivian for years. She had been too quiet, too supportive, too safe. She wore sensible shoes and cooked dinner and asked him about his day with genuine interest. She was the perfect wife for a struggling entrepreneur. But Preston wasn't struggling anymore. He was a titan. He needed arm candy like Lydia. Someone who looked good in paparazzi photos. Someone who made other men jealous. When he had kicked Vivian out 3 months ago, he had been ruthless. "I'm bored, Viv," he had told her in the hallway of the home she had decorated. "I've outgrown you. Take the settlement and go. Don't make a scene." She hadn't made a scene. That was the thing about Vivian. She possessed a quiet dignity that infuriated him. She had simply packed a single bag, looked at him with eyes full of unshed tears and whispered, "You will regret this, Preston. Not today, but soon." He hadn't regretted it for a second. Until tonight, for some reason, the memory of her sad eyes was haunting him. Maybe it was because Lydia was currently complaining that the waiter hadn't refilled her water glass in the last 3 minutes. "Preston," Lydia whined again. "Look at the door. Who is that? The maitre d' is practically bowing to the floor." Preston didn't want to look. He wanted to finish his drink and go home. But the sudden shift in the restaurant's atmosphere was palpable. The low hum of conversation stopped. Forks froze halfway to mouths. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Curiosity piqued, Preston lazily turned his head toward the entrance of l'Obsidienne. The heavy velvet curtains were pulled back by 2 staff members. The maitre d', a man named Henri, who usually looked at patrons with disdain, was currently beaming, his posture servile. "Right this way, Monsieur Valerius. Madame, your table is ready." Preston's spine stiffened. Dominic Valerius, the man who held Preston's financial future in his hands. If Dominic was here, Preston needed to go over and say hello, to grease the wheels before Friday's meeting. "It's Dominic," Preston hissed to Lydia. "Sit up straight. Put your phone away." "Who is he with?" Lydia whispered, squinting. "Is that a model? Her dress is incredible." Preston looked at the woman on Dominic's arm. She was wearing a floor-length gown of emerald silk that clung to every curve, shimmering like liquid money under the chandelier lights. Her hair, usually tied back in a messy bun, was now a cascading waterfall of dark chocolate waves resting on bare shoulders. Diamonds, real ones, massive and flawless, dripped from her ears and throat. She was radiant, she was breathtaking, and she was Vivian. Preston felt the blood drain from his face, leaving him cold and dizzy. He blinked, sure that it was a hallucination brought on by stress and alcohol. But it wasn't. Vivian Hall, the woman he had discarded with nothing but a check and a cold shoulder, was walking through the most expensive restaurant in the city. She moved with a grace he had never seen before, her chin held high, her eyes scanning the room with a cool detachment. But that wasn't what made Preston drop his glass. The war. Crystal shattered against the table edge, spilling cognac over the white tablecloth. But Preston didn't notice. Lydia gasped, jumping back to avoid the splash. But Preston was frozen, his eyes locked on Vivian's midsection. The emerald silk dress was tailored perfectly to accentuate her undeniable prominent curve. She was pregnant. Heavily pregnant. Based on the size, she was at least 6 months along. Preston did the math in his head, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. 3 months ago. We were still married. We were still... It was his. "Oh my God," Lydia laughed nervously, dabbing at the spilled drink with a napkin. "Preston, you clumsy idiot. Look at that woman, though. She's pregnant and wearing heels that high. That's dangerous." Preston couldn't speak. He watched as Dominic Valerius, the ruthless billionaire, known for eating companies alive, placed a gentle, protective hand on Vivian's lower back. The gesture was intimate, possessive. He leaned in and whispered something in her ear, and Vivian laughed, a sound like silver bells that Preston hadn't heard in years. Dominic guided her through the room. Every eye was on them. Men looked at Dominic with envy. Women looked at Vivian with jealousy. They were heading straight for the VIP section. To get there, they had to pass Preston's table. "Don't look at me," Preston thought, panicked. "Please don't look at me." He suddenly felt small. He felt cheap, sitting there with his mistress, surrounded by spilled alcohol, while his cast-aside wife walked by like royalty. But of course, she looked. As they approached, Vivian paused. She turned her head slowly, her gaze landing on Preston. There was no anger in her eyes. There was no sadness. There was only a pity so profound it felt like a slap in the face. Dominic stopped too. He looked at Preston, then at Lydia, and a cold smirk played on his lips. "Preston," Dominic said, his voice deep and commanding, "I didn't expect to see you here. Celebrating early?" Preston scrambled to stand up, his legs shaking. "Dominic, Mr. Valerius. Good evening, Yes, just a quiet dinner." He tried to ignore Vivian, but her presence was overwhelming. She stood close to Dominic, her hand resting instinctively on her baby bump. "And you know Vivian, of course," Dominic said smoothly, the malice in his eyes dancing. Preston choked. "Vivian, you look healthy." Vivian finished for him. Her voice was stronger than he remembered. "Richer." "I am." Surprisingly, removing toxicity from one's life does wonders for the complexion. "Hello, Preston." She didn't even look at Lydia. It was the ultimate insult. Lydia, sensing she was being ignored, bristled. "I'm Lydia," she interjected, standing up to assert herself. "Preston's girlfriend." Vivian finally shifted her gaze to the younger woman. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I know who you are, dear. You're the reason I'm free. I suppose I should thank you." Lydia's mouth fell open, but she couldn't find a comeback. Vivian radiated an aura of power that Lydia simply didn't understand. Preston couldn't take his eyes off her stomach. "Vivian," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You're pregnant," she said calmly. "Yes, Preston, I am. But—" he took a step forward, ignoring social protocol. "Is it—" Dominic stepped between them, his body a solid wall of muscle and expensive tailoring. His eyes were like ice. "Careful, Calloway. You're invading my fiancé's personal space." The word hit the room like a bomb. "Fiancé." Preston felt the room spin. "Fiancé? But we've only been divorced for 3 months." "Time moves fast when you find the right person," Dominic said, placing a hand over Vivian's on her stomach. "And when you realize what a treasure you've found, something others were too blind to see." Vivian looked up at Dominic with a genuine warmth that made Preston's stomach churn with jealousy. "We should sit, Dominic," Vivian said softly. "The baby is kicking." "Of course, my love." Dominic turned his back on Preston as if he were nothing more than a servant. "Enjoy your dinner, Calloway. We have a lot to discuss on Friday. But tonight, I'm dining with my family." They walked away, leaving Preston standing in the middle of the restaurant, the spilled cognac dripping onto his Italian leather shoes, his mouth agape. The whispers started immediately. The entire restaurant had witnessed the interaction. Preston sank back into his chair, his hands trembling. "Preston?" Lydia asked, her voice shrill. "Why is she with him? And why is she pregnant? You told me you guys never slept together at the end." "Shut up," Preston whispered, staring at the back of Vivian's head across the room. "Just shut up." He watched as the waiter at their table, the best table in the house, by the window overlooking the skyline, poured sparkling water for Vivian and wine for Dominic. He watched Dominic pull out her chair. He watched the way they leaned in to talk, ignoring the rest of the world. Preston felt a cold dread settling in his gut. The merger. Friday. Dominic Valerius was buying his company, and Dominic Valerius was engaged to the woman Preston had humiliated. "You will regret this, Preston. Not today, but soon." Her words echoed in his mind. He signaled the waiter for another drink, a double. He had a feeling this dinner was far from over, and the nightmare was just beginning. Preston Calloway could feel the whiskey burning a hole in his stomach, but it did nothing to numb the panic rising in his chest. Across the room, the scene was picture perfect. Dominic Valerius was peeling a langoustine for Vivian, his movements precise and caring. Vivian was laughing at something he said, her hand resting atop his forearm. It was a level of intimacy Preston and Vivian had never shared, not even in the beginning. "Stop staring at them," Lydia hissed, stabbing at her risotto. "It's embarrassing. You're the CEO of Calloway Tech. Act like it." "You don't understand," Preston muttered, his eyes narrowing as he watched Vivian stand up. She smoothed her emerald dress over the bump and signaled that she was heading to the ladies' room. This was his chance. "I'll be right back," Preston said, standing up abruptly. "Preston, don't you dare leave me here alone," Lydia protested, but he was already moving, weaving through the tables with a singular, desperate focus. He reached the corridor leading to the restrooms, just as the heavy oak door to the ladies' room clicked shut behind Vivian. The hallway was dimly lit, lined with vintage French posters and plush velvet wallpaper. It was quiet here, away from the clatter of silverware and the hum of the dining room. Preston leaned against the wall, waiting. He checked his watch. His heart was thumping against his ribs. He needed to know. He needed to hear her say it. 3 minutes passed, then 5. Finally the door opened. Vivian stepped out, refreshing her lipstick in a small, compact mirror. She stopped dead when she saw him blocking her path. She didn't jump. She didn't gasp. She simply snapped the compact shut and slipped it into her clutch, her expression turning into a mask of cool indifference. "I wondered how long it would take you to corner me," she said, her voice steady. "You always were predictable when your ego was bruised, Preston." "Is it mine?" Preston demanded, stepping closer. He ignored the jab. "The baby? Is it mine?" Vivian raised an eyebrow. "Does it matter?" "Of course it matters." Preston's voice rose, echoing in the narrow space. "If that child is a Calloway, I have rights. I have a legacy. You can't just disappear and play house with my rival while carrying my heir." Vivian let out a short, humorless laugh. "Your heir? 3 months ago, I was dead weight. You told me I was barren, Preston. Remember? You threw it in my face during every argument. You said I couldn't give you a family, so you went out and found a 22-year-old who could." Preston flinched. The memory was sharp. He had said that. He had been cruel, frustrated by their fertility struggles, and had used it as a weapon to justify his affair with Lydia. I didn't know," he stammered. "We stopped trying. The doctors said it was unlikely, not impossible," Vivian cut in, her eyes flashing with a sudden, fierce anger. "And it turns out, stress was a major factor. The moment I left your house, the moment I stopped walking on eggshells trying to please a man who couldn't be pleased, miracles happened." She took a step forward, forcing him back. "I found out 2 weeks after you kicked me out. I sat in a motel room, staring at the test, terrified. I called you, Preston. Did you know that? I called you 3 times. Preston froze. He remembered the missed calls. He had been in the Bahamas with Lydia, celebrating his freedom. He had seen Vivian's name on the screen and blocked the number. I was busy," he whispered, shame washing over him. "You were busy erasing me," Vivian corrected. "So I erased you. This baby? This baby is mine, and Dominic's, because a father isn't the man who provides the DNA, Preston. A father is the man who holds your hair back when you have morning sickness. A father is the man who goes to every ultrasound and cries when he hears the heartbeat. Dominic has been there for every second that you weren't." "He's using you," Preston argued, desperate to regain control. "Don't you see? Valerius Industries wants to acquire my company. He found out you were my ex-wife and swooped in to get leverage. He's playing you, Viv." Vivian looked at him with pity again. "You really think everyone operates with the same transactional heartlessness that you do, don't you? That's your tragedy, Preston. You can't imagine a world where someone loves without an agenda." "I won't let him raise my child," Preston snarled, his hands balling into fists. "I'll sue for custody. I'll tie you up in court for years. I have the best lawyers in the city. And I have the truth," a deep voice rumbled from behind Preston. Preston spun around. Dominic Valerius was standing at the end of the hallway. He hadn't made a sound. He stood with his hands in his pockets, looking relaxed, but there was a dangerous tension in his jaw. "Dominic," Preston said, straightening his jacket. "This is a private conversation between husband and wife." "Ex-wife," Dominic corrected, closing the distance between them in 3 long strides. He moved with the predatory grace of a panther. He positioned himself between Preston and Vivian, shielding her completely. "And since you're threatening the mother of my future stepchild, it's now my business." "You're stealing my life," Preston accused, pointing a finger at Dominic's chest. Dominic swatted the hand away as if it were a fly. "I'm picking up the diamonds you mistook for rocks, Calloway. You threw her away. You don't get to reclaim her just because she's shining now." Dominic leaned in close, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "And regarding your threats of a custody battle, I wouldn't advise it. My legal team has already prepared a file on your activities over the last year. The offshore accounts you forgot to declare during the divorce settlement, the creative accounting at Calloway Tech. If you try to come near Vivian or this baby, I will release everything. You won't just lose the company on Friday. You'll go to prison." Preston's face went pale. The air left his lungs. You wouldn't." "Try me," Dominic said. He turned to Vivian, his expression instantly softening. "Are you all right, darling?" "I'm fine," Vivian said, taking Dominic's arm. She looked at Preston one last time. "Goodbye, Preston. Good luck with the merger." They walked past him, leaving him alone in the hallway with the velvet wallpaper. Preston leaned back against the wall, sliding down until he was crouching. He was trapped. Dominic had him checkmated, and the game hadn't even officially started. By the time Preston returned to the table, he looked like a man walking to the gallows. His tie was loosened, his hair slightly disheveled. Lydia was furious. She had already finished half a bottle of wine on her own. "You left me for 20 minutes, she shrieked, drawing annoyed glances from nearby tables. "And look at you. You look like you've seen a ghost." "What did she say to you?" Preston sank into his chair. "Not now, Lydia. Just not now. Don't tell me what to do." Lydia slammed her glass down. "I'm tired of being treated like a second option. That fat cow over there is ruining our night, and you're letting her." "She's not fat. She's pregnant," Preston snapped, his patience snapping. "And she's not the one ruining the night. I am." Lydia's eyes narrowed. She looked across the room. Vivian and Dominic were eating dessert, a chocolate soufflé. They looked sickeningly happy. Lydia, fueled by wine and insecurity, stood up. "Sit down," Preston warned. "No," Lydia said, grabbing her purse. "I'm going to settle this. She thinks she's better than me because she trapped a new billionaire? I'm going to remind her who she really is, a discarded housewife." "Lydia, no." Preston reached for her arm, but he was too slow. Lydia marched across the dining room, her heels clicking aggressively on the parquet floor. Preston put his head in his hands. This was going to be a disaster. At the VIP table, Dominic saw Lydia approaching first. He stopped eating, his fork hovering mid-air. Vivian turned, wiping her mouth with a linen napkin. "Well, well," Lydia said loudly, coming to a halt at their table. "If it isn't the happy couple." The restaurant went silent again. This was the show everyone had been waiting for. "Can we help you?" Dominic asked, his tone icy. Lydia ignored him and glared at Vivian. "You think you're so special, don't you? Waddling around here, showing off your belly. We all know the truth, Vivian. Preston didn't want you. He wanted me. You're just picking up the scraps with this guy to make Preston jealous." Vivian looked at Lydia calmly. She didn't stand up. She simply gestured to the empty chair at their table. "Would you like to sit, Lydia? You seem unsteady." I don't want to sit, Lydia yelled. I want you to stop staring at my boyfriend. It's pathetic. You're holding on to a past that doesn't exist. Preston told me everything. You were boring in bed, you couldn't cook, and you were desperate for a baby he didn't want to give you. And now you've tricked this guy into raising Preston's mistake? The insult hung in the air, toxic and heavy. Dominic began to stand up, his face dark with rage, but Vivian placed a hand on his arm to stop him. She looked up at Lydia, her eyes hard as diamonds. "Lydia," Vivian said softly, but her voice carried across the silent room. "You are 22 years old. You are beautiful. You have your whole life ahead of you. It makes me sad that you are wasting it fighting for a man who is currently hiding at his table because he is too cowardly to come get you." Lydia blinked, glancing back. Sure enough, Preston was hunched over, refusing to look up. "Preston didn't leave me because I was boring," Vivian continued. "He left me because I started asking questions about the company finances. He left me because I refused to sign off on the risky loans he was taking out, loans that are now defaulting." Preston's head snapped up at the mention of the loans. "And as for this baby," Vivian smiled, rubbing her stomach, "this isn't a trick, and it's not a mistake. It's a fresh start. Something you should consider. Because once Preston loses his company on Friday..." "Lydia, do you think he'll still be able to buy you those bracelets? Do you think he'll still be fun when he's bankrupt?" Lydia looked confused. "Bankrupt? What are you talking about? He's selling the company for $1 billion. Dominic finally spoke. He leaned back, swirling his wine. "Actually, Lydia, that's a common misconception. I'm not buying Calloway Tech for $1 billion. I'm buying its debt." Lydia froze. "What?" "Preston is leveraged to the hilt," Dominic explained casually, as if discussing the weather. "He owes money to banks, to private investors, even to some unsavory characters overseas. I bought all those notes last week. On Friday, I'm not handing him a check. I'm calling in the debt. He can either pay me $300 million in cash by noon, or he signs over 100% of the company assets to me and walks away with nothing." Preston stood up at his table, knocking his chair over with a loud crash. You can't do that," he shouted across the room. "I can and I did," Dominic replied, raising his glass in a mock toast. "It's called business, Preston. You were so busy chasing skirts and buying sports cars that you forgot to read the fine print on your liquidity agreements." Lydia looked at Preston, then at Dominic, and finally at Vivian. The realization washed over her. The penthouse, the island, the shopping sprees. It was all smoke and mirrors. "Is this true?" Lydia asked, turning to face Preston, who had walked up behind her. "Preston, tell me he's lying." Preston was sweating profusely. "It's complex, Lydia. The market is volatile. I can fix it. I just need time." "He doesn't have time," Vivian said simply. "He has until Friday." Lydia looked at Preston with disgust. The illusion of power he had projected was shattered. She looked at the expensive bracelet on her wrist, then at Preston's terrified face. "You liar!" Lydia hissed. She unclasped the diamond bracelet, the one Preston had bought her with money he apparently didn't have, and threw it at his chest. "I'm not going down with your sinking ship." She turned on her heel and stormed out of the restaurant, leaving Preston standing there, humiliated, holding a piece of jewelry in front of the city's elite. "Now," Dominic said, his voice cutting through the silence, "I believe you're interrupting our dessert, Calloway. Unless you'd like to sign the surrender papers right now and save us all the meeting on Friday." Preston looked at Vivian. She wasn't looking at him with pity anymore. She was looking at him with closure. She had moved on and on. She had won. Preston dropped the bracelet into his pocket. He didn't say a word. He turned around and walked out of l'Obsidienne, the laughter of the other patrons following him out into the cold night air. But the story wasn't over. Preston wasn't a man who accepted defeat, even when he was beaten. As he stood on the curb waiting for his valet, a dark thought formed in his mind. If he couldn't have the company, and he couldn't have the girl, he would make sure Dominic Valerius paid a price for his arrogance. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "It's me," Preston said, his voice trembling with rage. "I need a favor, a big one. It's about Dominic Valerius." Wednesday morning broke over the city with a grey, relentless drizzle that matched Preston Calloway's mood. He hadn't slept. The alcohol from the previous night was still swimming in his blood, making his hands shake as he paced the floor of his expansive, minimalist office. The office, much like his life, was a facade. The mahogany desk was leased. The art on the walls, pretentious abstract pieces he didn't understand, was collateral for loans he hadn't paid in 6 months. He stared at his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window. He looked haggard. The encounter at l'Obsidienne had stripped him raw. Seeing Vivian, glowing with health and pregnant with another man's child, had been a psychological blow he hadn't anticipated. But the threat from Dominic Valerius, the threat of total financial ruin by Friday, was an existential crisis. He checked his phone. 10:07 a.m. The door to his office opened. His assistant, a nervous young woman named Sarah who hadn't been paid in 3 weeks, peeked in. "Mr. Calloway, there's a man here to see you. He says his name is, Razor. He didn't have an appointment." Preston straightened his tie, a manic glint entering his eyes. "Send him in." "And, Sarah, take the rest of the day off. Close the outer office." Sarah nodded, relieved to escape the suffocating tension of the suite, and scurried away. A moment later, a man walked in. He didn't look like a corporate hitman. He looked like an IT guy, slumped shoulders, a faded hoodie, and thick glasses. This was Tate, a former cybersecurity analyst for Valerius Industries, who had been fired for gambling on company time. Preston had dug him up from the dark corners of the internet at 3:08 a.m. "You have the access codes?" Preston asked without preamble, skipping the pleasantries. Tate sniffed, looking around the office with unimpressed eyes. "I have a back door into their server. Valerius thinks his security is impenetrable because he uses biometric encryption, but he forgets that humans are the weak link. I still have the admin credentials of a supervisor who never changed his password after I left." Preston walked around his desk, opening a drawer to reveal a thick envelope. It contained $50,000 in cash, the last of his liquid assets, scraped together from a safe in his apartment. "This is half," Preston said, tossing the envelope onto the desk. "You get the other half when the job is done." Tate picked up the envelope, thumbing through the bills. "And just to be clear on the scope of work, you don't want data exfiltration. You want injection." "Correct," Preston hissed. "I want you to plant evidence of insider trading and embezzlement on Dominic Valerius's personal drive. Make it look like he's been funneling company funds into offshore shell accounts to avoid taxes. And I need you to leak a tip to the SEC and the Financial Times by this afternoon." Tate smirked. "Nasty. If the SEC launches an investigation tomorrow morning, his assets will be frozen. He won't be able to execute any acquisitions. The deal for your company will fall through, and he'll be too busy fighting federal charges to chase your debt." "Exactly," Preston said, pouring himself a drink despite the early hour. "He wants to play hardball. I'll show him how we played in the old days. By the time Friday comes, Dominic Valerius will be a pariah. And Vivian..." Preston's voice trailed off. He imagined Vivian's face when the police raided Dominic's estate. She would be terrified. She would realize she had bet on the wrong horse. And who would be there to pick up the pieces? Preston. He would be the benevolent ex-husband, stepping in to save her from the criminal she had married. It was a delusional fantasy, but in Preston's sleep-deprived mind, it was the only path forward. "Do it," Preston commanded. "Burn him to the ground." While Preston plotted in the shadows, on the other side of the city, the atmosphere was vastly different. The Valerius estate was a sprawling sanctuary of calm. Dominic sat on the terrace overlooking the gardens, a cup of coffee in hand. At his feet lay a massive German shepherd named Kaiser, a retired police dog that Dominic had adopted. Kaiser was fiercely protective of the family, particularly Vivian. Vivian sat across from him, reading a book on prenatal development. She looked serene, the sunlight catching the diamonds on her engagement ring. "Are you worried about Friday?" Vivian asked, looking up. She had sensed Dominic's quiet intensity. Dominic reached down to scratch Kaiser behind the ears. The dog groaned in contentment. "Not about the money. The debt acquisition is solid. Calloway has no moves left." "He's desperate," Vivian warned, closing her book. "I lived with him for 7 years, Dominic. When Preston feels cornered, he doesn't surrender. He lashes out. He blames the world for his failures. He might try something unethical." Dominic smiled, a sharp, dangerous expression that didn't detract from his handsome features. "I'm counting on it." He picked up his tablet. On the screen was a live feed. It wasn't a security camera from the house. It was a covert recording from inside Preston Calloway's office. Dominic had bought Calloway Tech's debt, but he had also bought the loyalty of Preston's unpaid staff weeks ago. The privacy of Preston's office was an illusion. Dominic watched the grainy footage of Preston handing the envelope of cash to Tate. He turned the volume up so Vivian could hear the plan about the SEC and the planted evidence. Vivian listened, her face paling slightly. "He's trying to frame you. That's a felony, Dominic. He's risking prison just to hurt us." "He's risking prison because he thinks he's smarter than everyone else," Dominic said calmly. He tapped a button on the screen, sending the video file to his legal team and, more importantly, to the FBI contact he had been working with since he discovered Preston's own financial irregularities months ago. "And Tate?" Vivian asked. "The hacker?" "Tate isn't working for Preston," Dominic revealed gently. "Tate came to me the moment Preston called him. He's wearing a wire. The virus he's planting on my server. It's actually a tracker that traces back to Preston's IP address." Dominic stood up, walking over to kiss Vivian on the forehead. "Let him have his moment of hope, Viv. Let him think he's won. It will make the fall on Friday so much more satisfying." Vivian took his hand, pressing it against the baby's kick. "I just want him out of our lives, Dom. I don't want revenge. I just want peace." "To get peace," Dominic said, his eyes turning cold as he looked at the city skyline. "Sometimes you have to win the war first." Friday arrived with a suffocating tension. The sky was heavy with charcoal clouds, threatening a storm that mirrored the turbulence about to unfold inside the Valerius Industries skyscraper. The boardroom was a fortress of glass and steel located on the 50th floor. A long, polished table dominated the room, surrounded by empty leather chairs. Preston Calloway arrived 10 minutes early. He was dressed in his best suit, a charcoal Armani that he had picked up from the dry cleaners that morning. He looked refreshed. The dark circles under his eyes were concealed with makeup, and his stride was bouncy. He had checked the news all morning. There were rumors swirling. Twitter was buzzing about an imminent investigation into a major tech CEO. The stock for Valerius Industries had dipped 4% in pre-market trading. It worked, Preston thought, suppressing a grin as he walked into the boardroom. Tate did it. He sat at the head of the table, a power move, and waited. At 9 a.m. sharp, the double doors opened. Dominic walked in first. He looked impeccable in a navy blue suit, his expression unreadable. Behind him walked a phalanx of lawyers carrying thick briefcases, and beside him walked Vivian. Preston frowned. "This is a business meeting, Dominic. Why is she here? Did she come to beg for alimony?" Vivian didn't sit. She walked to the window, standing with her back to the room, looking out at the city she now effectively ruled alongside Dominic. She wore a cream-colored maternity dress that made her look like a statue of a goddess. "Vivian is here because she is the new majority shareholder of Calloway Tech," Dominic said, taking a seat opposite Preston. Preston laughed, a loud, barking sound. "That's rich. You think you can just give her my company. Have you seen the news, Dominic? I hear the SEC is very interested in your offshore accounts today." Dominic placed a single file folder on the table. He didn't look worried. He looked bored. "The rumors you paid to spread?" Dominic asked. "Yes, they caused a slight dip. A great buying opportunity for me, actually. I increased my stake in my own company by 2% this morning at a discount. Thank you for that." Preston's smile faltered. "It's not just rumors. They have evidence. The drive you paid Tate to infect?" Dominic interrupted. The room went deathly silent. Preston felt a trickle of sweat run down his back. "I don't know what you're talking about," Preston lied, though his voice squeaked. "Let's cut the charade, Preston," Dominic said, opening the folder. "Tate works for me. He has for 3 years. He's my head of cybersecurity. We staged his firing to flush out corporate spies. You walked right into the trap." Dominic slid a photo across the table. It was a high-definition still from the video in Preston's office. It showed Preston handing the cash to Tate. "This," Dominic said, pointing to the photo, "is conspiracy to commit corporate fraud, computer tampering, and obstruction of justice. And since you tried to manipulate the stock market, it's also securities fraud." Preston stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is entrapment. You set me up." "I gave you a rope," Dominic corrected. "You tied the noose yourself." Vivian turned around from the window. Her face was sad, but her eyes were dry. "It didn't have to be this way, Preston," she said softly. "You could have just signed the papers. You could have walked away with dignity. We were going to let you keep the house. We were going to let you keep your car." "I don't want your charity," Preston screamed, losing his composure completely. "I made you, Vivian. You were nothing before me. A waitress at a diner. I gave you a life." "You gave me a cage," Vivian shot back, her voice rising with sudden power. "You took a waitress who had dreams of going to law school and turned her into a housewife who was afraid to speak. You didn't make me, Preston. You broke me. Dominic is just the one who helped me pick up the pieces." "Law school?" Preston scoffed. "You weren't smart enough for law school." Vivian picked up a document from the table and threw it at him. "Read the signature line on the acquisition papers, Preston." Preston looked down at the legal documents that transferred ownership of Calloway Tech. The acquiring entity wasn't Valerius Industries. It was V. Hall Legal and Associates. "I finished my degree online while you were out cheating on me with Lydia," Vivian revealed. "I passed the bar exam 2 weeks before our divorce was finalized. Dominic didn't just buy your debt. He hired me as his lead counsel to execute the takeover." Preston stared at her, the woman he had called stupid, boring, and useless. She was the lawyer who was dismantling his life. The irony was so thick it choked him. "I won't sign," Preston whispered. I'll never sign." "You don't have to," a new voice said from the doorway. Preston turned to see 2 uniformed police officers and a man in a trench coat, Detective Miller. "Preston Calloway," the detective asked. "We have a warrant for your arrest." "On what charges?" Preston gasped, backing away until he hit the wall. "Corporate fraud is the least of your worries," Dominic said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. "My forensic accountants went through Callaway Tech's books. You've been embezzling from your own employee pension fund to pay for your lifestyle. That's stealing from your workers, Preston. That's 20 years minimum." The officers moved in, grabbing Preston's arms. He struggled, his eyes wide with terror. "Vivian," he pleaded, looking at his ex-wife. "Vivian, please, tell them to stop. We were married. I loved you." Vivian watched him with a detached calm. She placed a hand on her stomach, feeling the life growing inside her, a life that would never know the toxicity of this man. "You loved owning me, Preston," she said. "You never loved me." She nodded to the officers. "Get him out of here." As they dragged Preston out of the boardroom, kicking and screaming about his rights, Dominic walked over to Vivian. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. "It's over," he whispered into her hair. "Not yet," Vivian said, looking at the empty chair where Preston had sat. "We still have one thing left to do." "What's that?" "We have a company to save." Vivian smiled, her legal mind already whirring. "Callaway Tech has good engineers. Bad leadership ruined it. I have some ideas on how to restructure." Dominic laughed, a genuine hearty sound. "That's my girl. But first, lunch? The baby needs nourishment." "Lunch," Vivian agreed. "But somewhere quiet. No more drama." 6 months had passed since the boardroom doors closed on Preston Calloway's career. The seasons had shifted from the gloomy grey of autumn to the vibrant bloom of spring, mirroring the fortunes of the people involved. In the drab concrete recreation room of the Federal Detention Center, Preston sat alone. His Armani suits had been traded for an ill-fitting orange jumpsuit. His perfectly styled hair was now grown out and greasy. He wasn't the king of the world anymore. He was inmate 89 or 40. The television mounted in the corner was tuned to a financial news network. Usually Preston ignored it. It was too painful to watch the world spin on without him. But today, a familiar name caught his ear. And in a stunning turnaround, the tech giant formerly known as Callaway Tech has posted record profits for the second quarter, the news anchor announced. Under the new leadership of CEO Vivian Hall-Valerius, the company, now rebranded as Aurora Dynamics, has launched a revolutionary, eco-friendly server system that has Silicon Valley buzzing. Preston stared at the screen, his mouth dry. There she was, Vivian. She looked different. She was heavily pregnant in the footage, which must have been filmed just days ago, but she looked powerful. She was standing at a podium, cutting a ribbon. Dominic Valerius stood behind her, applauding, looking at her with unabashed pride. Critics who doubted Ms. Hall-Valerius's ability to pivot from law to tech have been silenced, the reporter continued. She has not only saved the jobs of 3,000 employees, but has also established a new childcare initiative within the company, setting a new standard for corporate responsibility. Preston felt a bile rise in his throat. That was his company. Those were his employees. She had taken his legacy, scrubbed his name off the building, and made it better than he ever could. A guard tapped him on the shoulder. "Calloway, you have a visitor." Hope flared in Preston's chest. Maybe it was his lawyer with good news about an appeal. Maybe it was Lydia, finally coming to her senses. He walked to the visitation booth and sat down behind the plexiglass. But it wasn't a lawyer, and it wasn't Lydia. It was his own mother, Martha Calloway. She looked old, tired, and disappointed. "Mum," Preston said, picking up the phone receiver. "Did you speak to the judge? Did you get the character witness statements?" Martha looked at her son with cold eyes. "I'm not here for that, Preston. I'm here to tell you I'm selling the estate. The legal fees are draining everything. I'm moving to a condo in Florida." "You can't sell the house," Preston panicked. "Where will I live when I get out?" "If you get out," Martha corrected sharply, "you're looking at 15 years, Preston. And frankly, after what I learned about how you treated Vivian, I'm not sure you deserve to get out." Preston was stunned. "You're taking her side. She stole my life." "She's the only one who offered to help me," Martha revealed, her voice cracking. "Vivian called me last week. She set up a trust fund to make sure I don't lose my pension because of your crimes. She's taking care of your mother when you couldn't even take care of your wife." Preston slumped back in his chair, defeated. Even his own mother had defected to the cult of Vivian. "And there's one more thing," Martha said, pulling a photo out of her purse and pressing it against the glass. It was a picture of a newborn baby, a girl. She had dark hair and bright, curious eyes. "She was born yesterday," Martha said softly. "Her name is Aurora Valerius." "Valerius?" Preston whispered. "But she's mine. I know she's mine." "Biology doesn't make a father, Preston," Martha said, standing up. "Dominic signed the birth certificate. He's the father on paper, and he's the father in practice. You have no rights. You have no claim. You are a stranger to that little girl." Martha hung up the phone and walked away without looking back. Preston stared at the empty chair. He looked at the photo his mother had left taped to the glass for a moment, before the guard ripped it down. In that instant, the crushing weight of reality finally broke him. He had chased money, status, and younger women, thinking they were the markers of success. In doing so, he had thrown away the only things that actually mattered: loyalty, family, and love. He put his head down on the metal counter and wept. Miles away, in a sun-drenched private suite at St. Jude's Hospital, the atmosphere was one of pure joy. Vivian lay in the bed, tired but glowing. In her arms, little Aurora was sleeping soundly, wrapped in a soft pink blanket. Dominic sat on the edge of the bed. He had been up for 30 hours, holding Vivian's hand through the labor, wiping her forehead, whispering encouragement. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were bright. "She looks like you," Dominic whispered, tracing the curve of the baby's cheek with his finger. "She has your chin." Vivian smiled tiredly. "She has my name," Dominic corrected gently. "And I promise you, Viv, she will never know a day of insecurity. She will never wonder if she is enough. She will be loved, fiercely and unconditionally." Vivian looked at the man who had saved her, not by fighting her battles for her, but by handing her a sword and standing by her side while she fought them herself. "I know," Vivian said. "I'm not afraid anymore, Dom. The past is gone." The door opened and a nurse peeked in. "Mrs. Valerius, there's a delivery for you. It's quite large." 2 orderlies wheeled in a massive arrangement of white lilies and roses, Vivian's favorites. There was no card, but Vivian knew who sent them. It was the staff at Aurora Dynamics, her team. She looked out the window at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, Preston was sitting in a cell, paying the price for his arrogance. But she didn't feel the need to gloat. She didn't feel the need to visit him or rub it in his face. Her revenge wasn't seeing him suffer. Her revenge was being happy. Her revenge was succeeding without him. Her revenge was looking at this beautiful baby and this wonderful man and realizing that the worst day of her life, the day Preston kicked her out, had actually been the best day of her life, because it was the day she started walking toward her destiny. Vivian leaned her head on Dominic's shoulder, closing her eyes as the morning sun washed over them. "Ready to go home?" Dominic asked. "Yes," Vivian whispered. "I'm finally home." The story of Preston and Vivian serves as a brutal reminder that the wheel of karma is always turning. Preston believed his wealth and status made him untouchable, treating people like disposable assets. He failed to realize that true power doesn't come from a bank account, but from character and integrity. Vivian's journey from a discarded, heartbroken wife to a powerhouse CEO and mother proves that rock bottom can be the solid foundation on which to build a new life. While Preston sits in a prison of his own making, isolated by his greed, Vivian thrives in a world built on love and resilience. It is the ultimate victory. Living well is not just the best revenge, it is the only revenge that truly matters. Wow, talk about a satisfying ending. I think we can all agree that Preston got exactly what he deserved. It just goes to show that you should never underestimate someone just because they're quiet. You never know what kind of power they're holding back. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, karma, and sweet revenge, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. I want to know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Preston's mother was right to cut him off? Or was that too harsh? Let me know down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.